Everyone hits a bump in the road. What do you do with it? Be inspired as we explore the ways people experience, navigate, and manage the ups and downs and twists and turns in this road trip called life. Welcome to another episode of Bump in the Road. The basic podcast is always free. We also have a premium subscription called Bump 2 that lets you listen in on extended behind-the-scenes conversations with our guests. Check it out at www.bumpintheroad.us. Christine Van Horn is on a mission to bring a focus on character back into our lives. Her book, Teach Your Children Timeless Truths in Uncertain Times, helps parents and grandparents connect and guide the younger generation. What are some of the secrets? Join us. Christine, welcome to Bump in the Road. If you would, tell us your story.
Oh, thank you so much for having me today, Pat. This is important to do, and I am very grateful to be here. My story really started a couple of years ago, and my father lived with me, and he was 95 years old when he passed, and he was a World War II veteran. And my dad and I always had such a wonderful relationship. We were very close. And then when we lived together, it was even more of a bond. And very suddenly, he passed away. He was 95 and he passed in his sleep. And, it left me with an emptiness because my dad was gone. And then also, I felt an incredible gap because he lived with me. And so the person in the house who lived with me was no longer there. And that was really my bump in the road. And I realized when you have a bump in the road, things can go one of two ways. You can brood about what happened to you and you can let it affect you, or you can take it in a positive direction. And I knew what positive direction to take this with. And that was actually a twofold thing. And it really is focusing on character for both of them. And character was something that was important to me. I've written 3 books on character, and I taught a program called Character Club. And when my dad passed, I started thinking about the character that he and the members of World War II, that generation, the greatest generation, they had character that we don't see in the world as much today. And I knew I needed to draw that out. And I needed to find a way for adults to teach character and what I call life skills to their children and grandchildren. So my bump on the road took me in these 2 pathways. And so I'd like to talk about the first one because I have written a book, and it's called Teach Your Children Timeless Truths in Uncertain Times. And it's a way to teach adults, like parents and grandparents, how to teach their children character traits. That isn't taught. And when I was young, we had character, that was taught into the different programs in school, but you don't see that as much today. Now, some schools do have, programs where they teach character, but it's not to the level of what I had growing up. And then some of the things that I'm also seeing as gap is what I call life skills, like time management and money management and goal setting and problem solving. And so my book really teaches the adults how to teach these things to their children and also how to be an example in their lives. And it's not just teaching these things to the children, but they need to show it. So, like for time management, as an example, I'm teaching my grandchildren how to keep day planners, or my youngest grandson, teach him how to keep a calendar to track different school events, his sporting events. And that's a good start for time management. It can start simple like that and not be very complicated. But I think this is a good way for adults to start bringing these things back into the lives of children because, like you said, we don't see these things. We just don't see these things to the level, that I did when I was young.
Well, one of the things that really struck me in your book was a comparison of school now versus school perhaps when we were in school. Mm-hmm. And it really blew me away. Our lives were so much simpler. And we didn't have any electronic gadgets. We went out and we played. We had to be creative. If you did anything wrong, your neighbor would know it, your teacher would know it, your principal would know it. There was not a lot of leeway there. And I think that has changed a lot. But I think the biggest change has been from going within, where we had to be creative and cooperative with the kids in our neighborhood and the kids in our school, to now where people have a much more one-on-one relationship with an external device. Those are two really different methodologies.
They truly are. And what you're saying is true. I remember being, a child, and, parents would turn you outside to play with the kids in the afternoon. You didn't go out with anything. You found, sticks and stones, and you jumped over cracks in the sidewalk. And I mean, you just used the things that were around you, or you sat and talked and you communicated with each other. And that has changed because people, especially the young people, they're communicating with these devices. So you're really right on with that. It's just totally different, and if you were to talk to, young people today about, here's a hula hoop, or here's a jump rope, or here's jacks. I don't think they even know what jacks are. And and just some of the simple things that we had, and that amused us and helped us communicate with each other. And now they truly are communicating more with a device, and it's not healthy.
No, and I would argue actually that they're not communicating, they're connecting and they're reacting. But there's not much depth or exploration or curiosity or critical thought in that reactive mode.
That is true. What you said with critical thought is so important, because unless you can have that critical thinking, how do you make the right decisions in life? If everything they do is based upon, a device that they have in front of them or something that they hear, they're not learning to think. And I think what you're talking about, critical thinking, is something that is very lacking today.
Well, and that goes back to your argument too of character. You develop character partly by making mistakes and correcting them and having the guidance to do that. But again, that implies a more present communal world in a lot of ways, doesn't it?
It really does. It really does. And we're lacking so much of that. But the adults need to have that interaction with the children to do it. And one way that they can do it is to make an honest effort to have family communication time. One of the things I talk about in my book is really just having dinner table discussions. And that is something that's really lacking. Sometimes you don't even have dinner table time together. But I think adults need to, set up some framework for types of discussion that they could have, and ask not just, simple questions. It's not, how was your day? And the child answers fine. It was, what did you do? And how did that work? And what did you learn? And probing questions where they can get real answers back. And that takes you a step in the right direction of that type of communication. But it's up to the adults to do that, because the children aren't going to know how.
No, and I think building those values as a young person leads to greater authenticity later in life. And I think that's really important, because a lot of the stories that I run into are stories about people reseeking authenticity, particularly midlife or later, because they've been externally oriented. They've been driven by the events and the people around them rather than being true to themselves. And it happens to all of us. But I think having that basic foundation is really helpful when things fall apart.
It is. Character, I say, is doing the right thing at all times, even when no one is watching. And they need to do that. And character is making that same right decision repeatedly. It's not just a one-time thing. It needs to be part of who we are, is to have good character. So as an example, if you are an honest person, it's not just being honest once or twice. Honesty is a way of life, and kindness is a way of life, and those different characteristics. And the adults need to teach it to the children. Parents and grandparents have seen this to some degree. more the older that you are, and the young people are just not seeing this to the level that it used to be.
What about younger parents?
They can rely on their parents for some assistance. So, reaching back to the grandparents, maybe arrange time where the grandparents can spend time with the kids, but the grandparents need to know what they're doing. It's not just sitting there and playing games with them. It's asking probing questions and making them think and explaining what these different things are. Like me with my planner and my grandchildren, it's a start at teaching time management. But also it can be with the different character traits in, drawing that out of the children to have those discussions. And some of it might actually be drawn out for the opposite thing. So as an example, if you want to be teaching respect, you need to be prepared that the kids might start talking about how people were not respecting each other, or there was some bullying situation they saw. And so it's not just relaying information, it's having that good exchange with the young children to learn how to turn that around and explain, well, say, here's an example, you're talking about kindness, and you need to be able to say what happens and what do you do if someone's not kind to you when you're trying to be kind to them, because that exchange and dealing with situations is not what's really being taught. And it's got to be at a grassroots level within the family unit to be able to see what's going on and have those children open up to you and be able to tell how to do that. One of the things that I have done is I created an online course through my website to actually step adults through how to teach character and how to teach life skills. And it's like a teaching of the adults, but they do it with the kids. And once they get the hang of what they need to do, then it's so easily adaptable for other things. But also, I try to explain a lot of that in my book as well. And it's just working with the situations that evolve within the children and their lives, and using that to turn the situations around and teach them what they really need to know, because these are not things that are being taught in school. And there's a lot of things that the adults don't want the kids to hear that are going on in school. So they need to really step up to the plate and teach what, things that they feel are the most important for them.
It's really hard to be a good parent. And part of that is being emotionally available and listening and sensing when your child is having difficulty, because those situations really open the door to using that. Maybe the child was bullied, for example. It really opens the door for this conversation of character, I think. But the parent has to be there.
They do. And that's why I focus a lot on dinner table discussions. And I actually have 3 videos on my website that are free. And one of them is how to have these discussions. So just a 5-minute video people could go to and just watch it. And you get the idea of what kind of questions, how do you dialogue with your kids? But it has to be intentional. And it's not just going to be haphazard. You need to really sit down, whether it's at, dinner time or another time a day. Maybe you dedicate 15 minutes a day to family discussion, and it's more than how was your day? It was fine. It was, more, what did you do? What did you learn? What situations did you encounter? And really build upon life experiences. And that can help draw the children out, because at first they may not want to talk. They just want to get back to their device and, go play a game or something, and are not as into talking because they haven't grown up around it like, I did when I was young. And so it's just a difference, but it's got to be intentional, really intentional.
Well, you're also giving the child an incredible gift, a methodology for looking at their daily life, identifying the things that are difficult, and maybe opening channels of communication. But if you're really good at this and you're really lucky, you may be giving them a means of coping with life's difficulties down the road.
It is. It really does become something that is a coping situation for them, because otherwise, if they don't know that they can talk to their parents or grandparents or other adult, and learn how to problem solve. It's analyzing the problem and figuring out what to do about it. Too often I think children just try to bury stuff or not talk about it and hope it goes away, and that's not the right answer. It's learning how to deal with it and learn how to um, interact, in the right way.
Well, and actually, the experience of sharing that is really important because if a child shares that with a mentor, parent, grandparent, whatever, and they have a good outcome, now they have this experiential sense of this is a good way to do things.
They do, and children are facing some situations in this day and age that are really, really different for them, that are different from what we had. Times are moving really quickly. Um, you know, Information is coming at an incredible rate. These are all changes from when I was young, and yet the things that children are facing, they don't have the life experiences to sort the stuff out. There's just way too much that's being thrown at them, way too young. And, some of these situations that they might face, say, like with bullying, they don't know what to do with it. They can't process this information like an adult can. So some of these things that they could be facing can get like buried inside them. And it's not healthy. That's not healthy. They need to learn how to um, talk to the adults. The adults, like you said earlier, need to learn how to listen, and pick up on signs from the kids. It's, if they just give a simple answer that maybe really isn't the simple answer, there has to be, maybe something more buried there that they need to draw out. So it's a whole exchange of information. And I'm not a psychologist, so I can't, talk to parents about, what happens if they unbury something. They need to talk to someone, at a local level that can help them through that situation. But what I'm trying to do is give a process so that adults and children can better communicate with each other. And that's what I'm really trying to do through the book, and just create an awareness within the adults that they need to communicate more with their children in the right way and teach them the right things.
You have a section that says, why is becoming a better person of character important? And I really love a lot of these points. Your first point, see, it all spells out character, is core values strengthened.
Mm-hmm.
Talk about that.
Yeah, once you are like this, your core values are what's inside of you, and it's how you're going to react all the time. And that's who you are. So it's not superficial. And that is something that parents really need to ensure is within their children, and strengthening those core values. And the interesting outcome of it is it strengthens it for the adults as well, because the children are going to be watching. And if in those core values, the very foundational things that are so important, they're going to watch what you are doing and what you're saying, and they're going to follow along after you. So it needs to be the same core values for the adults.
H, hope for the future comes more into light.
Yes. Once you are developing better character, it gives you hope. It gives you hope. You have something positive to be focusing on. It's not just the negative and this happened to me and being, that victim mentality. It's being the victor. It is that hope. It is moving forward. And it just changes your optimism in life. It really does.
A in character stands for assessment of self is conducted.
Yeah. If, you're focusing on, say, kindness as an example, as a character trait, and you are doing it for yourself and teaching it to your children, it is an assessment of yourself. You're going to become more aware when you are or are not acting like you are trying to teach to the child. So it really is an assessment of where you stand in that character trait.
That's fascinating because it offers so much opportunity for everybody to improve.
It really does.
Our renewal of self-worth.
Once you are focusing that, say, kindness, as I'm talking about that you're a kind person, it does give you a sense of self-worth. Once you say it, and I'm big talking about affirmations. And if you can say to yourself, I am a kind person, and you look for opportunities to be kind, it really increases the self-worth that you really have. It makes a big difference.
Appreciation is enhanced.
If you are focusing on, let's say, kindness again, um, it does enhance all of that in your lives. All of these things are so positive. And that acronym that I use with character, all of those things are true. It just leads you in such a positive direction.
See, communication skills become stronger.
They do, because if you are, talking about this with your children or expressing things to others, it does enhance your communication. You learn that communication is not just the words, but it is actions that you have as well. Whether it's being kind to someone or talking nice to someone or whatever the character trait is, it really just increases that in your life.
T, trust with others is increased.
It is, because again, going back to, kindness, say I am showing you kindness, and you're going to know that, and you might reciprocate even in a thank you. That does build a trust. It increases the bond that you have with others. And you aren't going to have that if you are not acting in positive character traits.
That is so true. And that trust piece of the equation determines so many things in life. It really does. E, ethical qualities are better displayed.
Yeah, ethics is really being that good character. Showing that good character trait in so many different ways. And that's what ethics really is, because you're looking and striving to do the right thing. And that does increase all of it. These are all benefits of doing this.
And R reveals a more accurate identity of the person.
It does, because that's who we really are inside. I think so much of the goodness inside us is masked with, the negativity in the world, the focus on technology, as you had mentioned. Those are all things that take away from it. But when you have more interpersonal experiences by displaying good character and showing things to others and, as good character traits, it really does. It really enhances that capability.
Well, and I think all of us, particularly children, I'll say most of us, particularly children, we're basically good people. And I think we want an opportunity to show it, but we need a guideline in this world.
We do. We do. And it's just not there to the level that really needs to be.
Now, was it really there with the GIs, or the Greatest Generation? Or is that a little bit of a retrospective idea that we have? And is it representative of the fact that life was just simpler than it is now?
Life was a lot simpler, and that was really, really true. And in part of the research that I've been doing, the part 2 of all of this is I want to write a book about the Greatest Generation and the character that they had and what lessons can they give to us today. And life was simpler, but there were things that they felt stronger about. They had, greater desire to follow through. I'm just looking at something. There were a couple of sources that I had that talked about the characteristics of the Greatest Generation. And these were some of the words that described them. They had great personal responsibility, integrity, humility, work ethic, service, commitment, frugality, self-sacrifice. And those were, from research materials, some of the things that were used to describe them. And yes, you can look around at society today and be able to see those things. And yes, there are people doing it, but they did it as a group. It wasn't, some people do this. They were called into service to serve their country, and they did in a large group. It wasn't, oh, maybe I can or maybe I shouldn't. It's just they graduated high school and they went into the service to protect their country. It was in them. It was ingrained in who they were, and I think that's a lot of what is missing today. And I just want to give voice to those people, and whether it's talking to them directly, there are not too many of them around. They're around age 100 or so. But, maybe through their families, talking about what they really did, whether they were in the military and fighting overseas, or whether they were on the home front, working in the factories to make sure that all of the supplies were met. There were so many different ways that people served, but there was a service. I like that word service that's in here because they were very service oriented. And I don't think as a society we're service oriented. We're not looking for ways to serve one another to the level that was in the past like that.
That's a really interesting point. Because I think if you look back at the Greatest Generation, to some extent they were molded by events, World War II, where they were drafted and they had that military discipline, and it was a real sense. Well, it wasn't a sense; it was do or die. I mean, that was real. Yes. And I've interviewed a number of veterans too, and I interviewed Arnold Sampson recently. He fought in Vietnam. He was a medical evac helicopter pilot, and I asked him, how do you wake up every day, go into the jungle in an unarmed helicopter with people shooting at you, hover over the jungle, and bring up the wounded? I mean, the guts it takes to face that day after day is just astonishing. And, he said part of it is, oh boy, I don't have his exact words at my fingertips, but essentially you just ignore it, you go forward, you don't think anything can happen to you, and you have to have that mindset in order to accomplish this. But when you're done and you look back, my words, not his now, when you're done and you look back, wow, look at what you have accomplished through courage, through commitment, through responsibility. It's just astonishing. It really is.
And servicemen today, and in the Vietnam era, like you had said, they had that. They had that. They just did it because it was the right thing to do. It was their service to their countries, protection of the people that they were taking care of. And, we see it in the servicemen, and they are that way. Those men and women, that is part of who they are. It's part of the characteristics that they follow. But when you look around in the world, you don't see as much of it, in the general society. Where in the time of the Greatest Generation, they lived through the Great Depression and they learned how to be frugal and how to do without. Now kids are like all upset if they don't have their screen time. What would it be like if they were out there trying to find food, as the people were, in that time? And they learned some of those things. And, that's why it's a characteristic of frugality. They learned how to do these things. And not that I ever want hard times to befall us like that ever again, but I don't know how much we are as adaptable to things like that, should something like that occur, as they were back then. And I think they took all the things that they learned from the Great Depression, and those carried in their lives. Those became core values, like we initially talked about. And then when they went into World War II, those things were in them, and they were their core values, and they were able to adapt to the terrible situations that they faced. And I just don't know if, as a society, could we do that again if it ever came to something like that.
It would require, I don't know, it would require an enormous shift in our perspective on things. We're a very materialistic society, very hierarchical, who has more, who has less, that type of thing. And I think that for us to face a situation like that, it would require people to fundamentally redefine their core self And that's a massive bump in the road to let go of your beliefs and bring in new beliefs. That's very difficult to do.
It really is. And should a situation like that ever occur, that's a bump in a road, not for a person, but for as a society. How as a society do you adapt to something like that? How do you overcome? And I don't know the answer, but we can do this at a kind of a grassroots family level to start making some of those changes. And that's where I'm really looking to go. And I want to talk to, members of the greatest generation or their families and find out, how do they do these things? I think they have lessons to us as a society that we can learn. Their voices are still there. We need to learn what they knew. And how can we take that wisdom that they had and be able to apply it today? And, just doing it a little bit at a time is a good start. It's a real good start to be able to do that.
No, I look back. My father flew for the 8th Army Air Force in World War II, which was stationed in England, and had the highest casualty rate of any of the armed services forces. They'd send those bombers up over Germany, and some number would come back. And they did that day after day after day. And we walked into St. Paul's in London once when I was a child, and there was this glass kiosk with a book in it. And I went up, and it didn't mean anything to me. My father went up and looked at it, and it was open to a page with some of the people he had flown with who had died. Oh. And he never really talked about the war, but he did mention one or two things. And one time he talked about they were coming back from a mission. Almost everybody was dead on the plane. The plane was shot up. Somehow they had to get this thing back to England and land it and then get up and do it all the next day.
It just makes you wonder how they had that strength and courage to be able to do those kind of things.
I think you do what you have to do sometimes.
You do.
And I think that sometimes that rolls into other issues later on, PTSD, things like that.
Yes.
But I think that, as you were saying earlier, if you can look at all these elements and see the positive strengths in them, it gives you a methodology for coping with these very difficult things and using them to build a positive direction versus being a victim.
Yes. And they were able to do that and didn't look at themselves as victim. And I think in society, there's too much of that victim mentality today. And instead of getting out there and being that victor and doing whatever you needed to do to have a positive influence for that day.
No, I think so too. If you were to give a parent advice, what advice would you give them?
Talk to your children and talk from your heart. Tell them what you know and what your expectations are for them. I think too often children don't understand what their parents expect of them. So it can be done through, character traits. So if I go back to kindness, children need to know what their parents expect them to do to be kind and how to act if people are not kind to them. But having that really heartfelt discussion with your children is extremely important. And, things are so fast paced today. And, most of the households have both parents working and the kids are in activities and everybody's always running. And it's getting more and more difficult to take the time to do this. But, making it be very intentional and methodical to sit down with your children and have these heartfelt discussions is huge. And so I think that's my greatest advice, whether you do it on a daily basis or a long period of time, once a week, or however you do it, there has to be that parent-child or grandparent-grandchild relationship where you can communicate like that. And I think that will alleviate so many things that maybe children are afraid to talk about, and they internalize and they hold it within and they don't know how to deal with it. But you can provide that open door to be able to give them a pathway to express their feelings and for you to tell them, your expectations for them.
Thank you for listening. I hope you'll support this podcast by becoming a Bump 2 subscriber. Buy us a cup of coffee. It's your support that makes this podcast and website possible. I hope you found something in today's podcast that inspires you along your own life's path, because sometimes a bump in the road is actually a portal into a more conscious and meaningful life.